All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the public hearing for the 24-25 school budget. At this point, I will turn it over to Superintendent Schwartz, as well as Business Manager Gia Quinto for the budget presentation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, too fast. So as we like to do, we're going to start by setting a couple of goals for this evening. We're going to review the 24-25 budget proposal that was adopted by the board on March 25th. And then Mr. Giaquinto and I will be happy to answer any questions you might have about the information. And as I like to do, I would encourage you to take a moment and read our Scotia-Glenville mission statement. This is where we start with all decisions that we make. And as folks might recall, I measure against 4 questions. What do we want for our students? How can we best achieve that? How will we know if we've been successful? And finally, what will we do if we're not? I would also add that what you're seeing tonight is an overview of the final budget that was adopted on March 25th. So we are not going to go through the adjustments and reductions that were made, the wiggles, if you will, but all of that information is posted on our website. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Mr. Giaquinto.
Thank you, Sue. Good evening. So in front of us is what the board approved as our spending limit for 2024-25. 65 million, almost 65.1 million, 3.38% spending increase. It will increase the tax levy, which is the amount of revenue we have to generate from the taxpayers, about $33.4 million, 2.83% increase compared to the prior year, or $919,000. The tax cap formula allowed us to go up 2.86%. We're going up 2.83%, so it's slightly under by $10,436. This is a summary of the expenditures categorically from instructional costs all the way down to home and community. It shows the almost 63 million of the current year budget compared to the proposed budget of 65.1. And you can see that the big expense drivers as far as increases categorically are transportation, building and grounds. Transportation is due to the increase in out-of-district transportation for programs that we have to get our students to that we could not transport with our existing fleet or bus drivers. So that was over $400,000 increase. Building and grounds is an increase due to the student resource or school resource officers now being fully funded into that department, and also a purchase of a new van, utility van, $45,000. So those are the big increases categorically. The rest are pretty much, under 3%. The funding of the budget is derived primarily from state aid and the tax levy, which is all the tax dollars. State aid, which is 38% of the funding for the school budget, only increased 2.2% this year. And we can kind of expect that going forward or less because we're fully funded under the foundation aid formula as it exists. And because we have declining enrollment and state considers us a wealthy district, we don't expect much more than that going forward. And the tax levy, which is the biggest percent of the budget, 51%, is going up 2.83%. Our fund balance, which is what we save each year and basically put in the bank for rainy day, they call it, is about 7% of our funding. This is a historical, in 11 years is because the tax cap has existed for 11 years, and you can see that the 24-25 categorical, the tax cap's 286, the average is 271 over the 11 years, so we're right about there. The increase over the last 11 years has been 2%. We're at 2.83, so we're above the average historically. But the tax rate, which is what's going to get assessed to each of the businesses and residential properties in the district, you can see has averaged 1.32%. This year, it's going to be probably about 1.92%. That's due to the growth in the area. You can see on Dutch Meadow Drive, you can see all those apartment complexes going up. Freeman's Bridge Road is developing. That helps alleviate the burden on the taxpayer. Our spending increased 2.54 historically. You can see that we're over that at 3.38. Last year, we were over it at that average too. So the last 2 years, we've been going up on our expenditures. Primarily, things like health insurance are now going back up to the pre-COVID days, about double digits. So these are things that will continue to drive our expenses, where we benefited during COVID of having very low health insurance expenditures. This is the typical tax bill. If the tax rate comes in at 1.92, you can see that on a $160,000 home, about $74 increase to what you're paying this year before STAR. And if you have a $200,000 assessed value home, about $93 increase before STAR. This is the three-part budget. The state has us recategorize our budget into three components: administrative, which is self-explanatory, that's the admin, plus the transportation supervisor; program, which is the instructional cost in transportation; and capital is your debt service and your building and grounds. Capital, you don't really fool around with. You have to maintain that % throughout the budget process if there are reductions subsequent, because you got to maintain health and safety standards. And your debt service, you have to honor your debt because the voters approve that. So you can see this year at 11.2, 72.9, 15.74, it's in line with our most recent budgets. Nothing's really shifting dramatically categorically. This is where we hope we don't get. If the budget goes down once, the board can decide to go out with another budget or go right to a contingent budget. If it's defeated twice, you automatically default to a contingent budget. That will require you to return to the prior year's tax levy or reduce the budget by $919,000. And you must cut it in a certain way that you stay in the same proportion of the last adopted budget. So that would require a $699,000 cut to program and a $220,000 cut to administration to arrive at a contingent budget. And let's hope we don't get there. These are the propositions that you will see when you go vote on the, is that the 21st? I think it is. Third Tuesday in May. That's the spending limit of $65,085,194. We go to the next page, we'll see the bus purchase proposition, 3 buses, $329,000, no impact on 24-25, and there will be state aid on that in the following year, and there'll be debt falling off, so it'll be budget neutral going forward. Something new this year is the electric bus proposal. The district is in the final round of an EPA grant, which we could get 5 buses awarded. It gives the district $250,000 per bus. Unfortunately, electric bus is running about $450,000. If we were to take possession of these buses, we have to come up with $1 million for those 5 buses. We don't have that kind of money sitting around, so we're going to ask the public to allow us to borrow the money. We will get state aid on it over 12 years. Proposition 4 is a capital project, which has been outlined at previous board meetings, and again, there'll be a public hearing on this on the 13th from the architect. But again, this will do things like the vestibules at each of the schools will get safety enhancements. So all 6 schools will get new vestibules to be more safe. There'll be some masonry work, some HVAC work, and there'll be no impact on the tax levy of 24-25 or going forward from this project coming on because of debt falling off as this comes on the books.
Thank you, Mr. Pinto. So at this time, we would open the floor for any questions. Yes.
Hi. So I have a question about your statement on the declining enrollment, saying that you're getting like that 2.2% funding, and that you're seeing that that's what you're going to be getting for years going forward. Is that a significant decrease from what we've been getting previously? And if so, if that's going to be continuing to drop at that, stay at that 2.2%, how does that impact?
It's a good question. The foundation aid formula has some factors in it where if you have growth in enrollment, you get more aid. If you have declining wealth of your community, you get more aid. That's the way the formula works. So we're losing enrollment, so therefore that hinders that part of the formula. And our wealth factor of the district, because it's better than the average of the state, you get penalized for that. So make it simplistic, we were averaging more than 2%. This was it's almost like flat aid. And I expect it to be worse next year because the governor has stated she's not going to aid empty seats. So as these districts, which are many in New York State, have declining enrollment, she's going to work with the legislature to reconfigure foundation aid so that she's not paying the same type of aid for declining enrollment. So I expect this to be, because inflation's another factor of this, and inflation's coming down. So that's kind of the new us right now, is at 2%.
What was it prior?
It fluctuated because they withheld aid under gap elimination, then they gave us a surge of it, and then the prior year, I don't have it in front of me, but we're probably like 6-7% increase because it was an election year. They had all this federal money, so the states were rich in money, and they threw it at the districts. So we knew that was a false, and we handled it properly. That's why you don't see a real big drastic reduction in staff, just a realignment this year.
So with the 2.2% and it staying that way, do you see that will significantly impact the district going forward? And having the enrollment, like are you projecting enrollment continuing to decrease, or are you projecting it to steady out?
Yes, we're projecting like a 1% decline in our cohort going forward. Susan and Rick Arquette have done an enrollment projection to the board. It's been in previous budget presentations, so we see us losing students going forward based on what's coming in for kindergarten and going forward. What was the second part of your question?
So how is that going to impact us?
Well, our costs will continue to increase.
Yes.
As costs to support your own home increase. So that happens in schools too. We have contractual obligations to meet, as well as programmatic obligations to meet. So our concern is that, and again, if you look at our budgets historically, the budgets get larger, but our enrollment is declining. So there's a gap there. So do I think there's the potential that things will get harder? I do. The district is very fiscally conservative, and Drew does a great job at trying to mitigate the bumps over time. But there are also costs we don't anticipate, like the additional transportation costs we had this year that we didn't know were coming. So there are always things that we try to be mindful of, but the reality is we have less children and it's costing more to educate them.
So if we do nothing different going forward, to answer your question more straightforward, I've got it now. So you saw the expenses going up about 3.38%. You can expect that next year, 25, 26. And if the state aid's only 2%, you've got a gap there because the state aid is 40% of our budget. So you've got to make up that money somewhere. So if you're running a business, you either have to bring in more clients with revenue or you got to cut expenses. So they're going up. Health insurance is going up over 10%. We think that's going to continue double digits. We were benefiting in the prior years from a false bottom of 0% health insurance because you couldn't go to the doctor during COVID for elective, so the claims went down. And I presented that to the board. We benefited from some low budgets, but it was a false bottom. It's back. Labor and pension cost money. To run these schools, you got to pay people. So, no, it doesn't bode well to staying at a 2% tax cap.
Right. So I'm sorry, I have one more question.
Sure.
So so I'm just reading from this. It says the proposal maintains all current programs and services for students and for students. So I'm just concerned. With the elementary buildings and hearing that special education services in 2 of our elementary buildings are now being moved to other elementary buildings. So children in the home schools of Glen Warden and Glendale are no longer able to get their services services and or not get services to stay in their home building where their sibling may be, or they have to be moved to another school. And that is very concerning and quite frankly, it's best for kids. So I don't know if that's maintaining your current program.
Well, I want to say two things. One is there were 4 children who could potentially be affected by that. And the
Or
last,
children between the 2 schools.
between the 2 schools, actually between 3 schools. And it's less than half of those children at this point. So less than 2 children we believe might need to move. But here's the challenge we're up against. For example, we have English as new language learners in our school district. If you come here as an elementary student who needs English as new language, you're going to Scotia-Glenville, because the only way I can provide that service is to group those children in one school. So anyone who arrives here with those needs after testing goes to Scotia-Glenville regardless of their home school, because it's much more efficient to put one teacher there and all of the children there. If the children were in every building, there'd be no way I could serve them.
Is that more efficient for the district or for?
We think it's more efficient for both students and staff, because we can locate them in one spot, and then that teacher, our ENL teacher, is available to team teach, co-teach with the teachers at the different grade levels where those children are. So to provide them the most robust services, we do believe that for the children's sake, and I think our record would prove that out, it has been most efficient. We can't offer the full continuum of services in special ed in every school. We don't have enough enrollment, quite frankly, to do that. So some of the suggestions about consolidating or changing services really had to do with, again, working to provide the best continuum of services we could, which could be anything from just speech therapy, just OT, just PT, to co-teaching, in a way that was mindful of the staffing we had and how we could best serve students. Is it always perfect? No. I'd be the first person to say that. But as a former special ed teacher, having students where they can receive the services they need, I think trumps, if you will, just making an arrangement that allows them to get some service, but perhaps potentially not what they need, by keeping them in their home school. Kids with special needs tend to move around because you can go from anywhere from a single service to a self-contained classroom. Again, I can't put a self-contained classroom in every school. I wouldn't have enough children to have classes of that nature. So we're trying to look at our special education services and say, what's the best way we can serve our kids and what kind of services they need. You're welcome. Other questions? Yes.
Do you foresee having to close one of the elementary schools in the future so that we might enrollment?
Well, quite honestly, what I would like to do is open a preschool and reconfigure our grade levels. If the enrollment predictions that have been done prove to be accurate, we could have closed the school this year. None of us has the heart to do that, quite honestly. But I would say, looking forward, again, we have to be mindful of what our community can bear. I live here too, and the efficacy of keeping 4 schools open. But we have had some conversations about potentially could we offer different grade level configurations? Could we, I'm not looking at any board members, could Susan finally get her preschool? I'd be happy having a preschool that was open to children in the county. So I don't see that as being imminent, but it is realistic.
State or federal money could be involved.
Preschool?
Yeah.
Yes. Right now, there is state funding for preschool. It's just not enough.
Yeah. One other quick question is, my understanding is that there are federal dollars that come in to, should be included in the state budget. I just didn't say federal money up there. How is that counted?
Federal budget's in a, they call the, it's its own fund. It's not part of the general fund. So we have to be able to show maintenance of effort of the federal dollars that we get, that we're spending enough on the local side, which we do meet that thing, but it's not part of the 66 million you're looking at.
So the federal dollars come in for a different purpose.
Right. It helps support under 611 and 619, which are special needs federal subsidies. That's where the general fund picks up most of it, and the federal government gives you some in what they call the federal fund. So we have to account for that totally different. It's called the special aid fund. I had a cramp for a second.
And those dollars, I would have just added, are also driven by the number of identified students there are. So there's a weighting for, a weighting for each student that you have. So we've also seen in our title funds, which serves our general ed students with academic support needs, and in our special education funds, a decline in those funding streams because we're being impacted across the board in terms of enrollment. So it is not just general education students. There are less of other types of students that would have driven more aid to us. That's why I always laugh. I say to my friends in Schenectady, listen, you guys have more money than you know what to do with. Give me some of your money. Or give me some of your students. I'll take either one. Be happy to. If there are no other questions, Mr. Talbot, do you want to close the public hearing?
All right, thank you both. If there's no other questions, we'll close the public hearing at this time. Give us about a 5-minute break before we move to part 2 of that, meet the candidate.